I'm very excited about our first speaker here. He's going to talk about the globalization of the practice of law through digital transformation. And I'm talking about Rodolfo Rivera, who is there with us. Hello there, Rudy. Rodolfo, just as a quick bio here for you. He is the Chief International Counsel at Fidelity National Financial. He's a board chair for Step Warm Floor, executive committee board member, global board for the Global Board of Association of Corporate Counsel. He is a TED speaker, and he is leading for Fidelity National Financial, a Fortune 500 company, for the past 15 years. A transformation that has a digital component applied to law. And he's going to be sharing with us some of his experience, and that includes global expansion of the organization's operations in establishing offices in Mexico, in Malta, as well as establishing a network of attorneys in 34 countries. He currently manages a multi-million-dollar national and international litigation budget on a combined exposure of over $250 million with an 80% success rate. So he's a frequent guest speaker and lecturer on managing litigation, litigating in multicultural jurisdictions, and managing outside counsel. So without further ado, Rudy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you, Jose. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Those of you who've been practicing for very little time probably don't know what I'm talking about. Those of you who've been practicing for 40 years probably do know what I'm talking about. The digital transformation of the practice of law has changed. You often hear when you talk about the age of a dog that one dog year is 7 people years. So a dog that's 7 years old is really 49 years old. Well, if you relate that to technology, I call it computer years. A laptop that's 1 year old is probably 50 by now, the way it changes, especially when you look at the way companies like Apple always make updates. But the digital transformation of law has been really an incredible ease in which to actually manage a practice in 40 years ago. But let me take you back in time, because when I started practicing law, I can remember the first computer was 2 floppy disks. And I spent $1,000 on a Hitachi fax machine that had thermal paper that just, you fed it in 1 sheet at a time. Everything was done by paper, and there was a pushback by older lawyers to engage this technology in the practice of law, because they viewed the practice of law as something that was a service-oriented profession, face-to-face. Everything was in the presence. But the technology has changed that. So let me go through the progression a little bit. The other side of it is technology developed slowly along with the progression of the practice of law. When I practiced law in St. Louis, I said, well, I want to practice international law. International law in St. Louis, come on, okay? Technology has allowed basically the globalization of law and lawyers who can reach clients anywhere in the world, even from a small country in the Seychelles to, a small country in Latin America. The technology has allowed people to render services on a global basis. So how has it changed? First of all, you go from the fax machine to the computer. Then now you go to the internet. What that has done, it has allowed companies to communicate on a much more efficient level. So prior to having a you had a secretarial pool. Now you have resources like Dragon software, other Philips technology that allows you to dictate, and the words magically appear on your screen. For law firms, that's allowed them, say, to reduce their typing pool, to just have a group of people who basically review or edit documents rather than originating them. It's allowed people to connect much quicker. That comes with the price, and I'll get into that later, but you can now render services from the beach if you have a laptop or an iPad, as opposed to historically having to be in your office. I remember some of the old lawyers in St. Louis, if they were going to go on vacation, especially if they were trial lawyers, they would send boxes of depositions and other exhibits to the vacation and transport them there and spend half a day. Now, with your iPhone, your iPad, your computer, you take those documents anywhere around the world. So really the first I'd say major significance in the transformation of law is how you're able to render services. So keep in mind that historically somebody had to come to your office. At best, it's a phone. Now you have multiple platforms like Zoom, WebEx, StreamYard that allow you to communicate instantly. You can, I've had calls in 3 different countries on 3 different days. Historically, we get on an airplane. Now we just click, 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 and there we are. There was some resistance to that because people still like the face-to-face, and technology is not without its compromises. As when you have a Zoom or video type presentation, you do lose the personal element, and that's important in some cultures to have a personal connection, because that's how many people do business. I know, Jose's from Brazil. I do a lot of work in Latin America. That personal touch is still important. So that's, one of the downsides of technology, but for efficiencies, it's greatly enhanced it. So it's also allowed you to really deliver services instantaneously, where you could, now stop and think about it. How many of you prepare a letter anymore? Unless it's a formal demand, something similar, almost all communication is through email. And at best, it's an attached document. So email, rather than the telephone, has become the modem of communication. In fact, this is something that drives me crazy with millennials. They'll respond to a text, but they won't call you back. In some ways, I'm still of the old school. I would prefer to talk to somebody, but the texting and the email is the new form of communication. Why is that? I have my suspicion that people are always multitasking. And again, technology has its price. So rather than somebody paying 100% attention to you, they respond to you quickly in email, and you wonder if they're really paying attention to you. Stop and think in each of your personal lives. How often do you call somebody? Most of the time it's going to be an email. Most of the time it's going to be a text, but not often is it a call. And now what I'm finding more and more is when they do want some type of voice connection, rather than calling you on the phone, they'll call you on Teams. My entire company is set up on Teams. And we don't call people on the phone anymore. We click on Teams and we just see if he's there. If he's there, he'll answer. If he's there, not there, he won't answer. So that's the ease of communication is somewhat easier now. The other thing that's really been incredible is the ability to collaborate with others simultaneously. And when you're preparing for a big case, for example, and you have to have multiple people and you have multiple documents, well, now you can do that virtually rather than everyone being in a room, people flying in, making copies of the documents. You have a system where you can collaborate with people all over the world. Yesterday, I had 2 days of hearings in a matter in Bermuda. And of course, people were everywhere. The documents were digital. Eliminated the need for a trip. So that type of efficiency is really good in terms of collaboration. It makes the collaboration more efficient. You can upload the documents to, say, for example, Zoom. You can upload them here. You can upload them to Teams, anything. It's allowed people to work perhaps more efficiently. Again, the downside to that is that you don't have the personal connection. So you have to compensate for that in one way or another. So as much as I embrace technology at my old age, I still see the need for some type of personal contact. And I'll give you a good example. What I've learned since I've embraced this technology, and I do a lot of meetings on Zoom, a lot of meetings on Teams, is that people still do not trust the technology completely, especially people I deal with in Latin America. For example, when you click on Zoom, it tells you you're being recorded, you can stay on or not. But you know what? I can record from my cell phone and nobody knows, right? What I have found is that people will tell you things, will not tell you things on a Zoom platform that they will tell you in person, mostly because they want to know that you're there. And so in some ways, people don't necessarily trust the technology. Now, the flip side of that is you trust it too much. And people start saying things that they shouldn't say, because remember, whatever you say is going to be saved, and somebody will keep it forever. I tell my son, who's now working at AT&T in sales, I said, son, remember, whatever you do anywhere, somebody's got a phone, and anybody with a phone is a director and a producer. That may end up somewhere. So always be careful how you behave. I actually give that advice more to younger kids than I do to the older people. So you know, that's the flip side, that everything you do, everything, the phone, everything is for public consumption. The other changes that have occurred drastically is the fact that hearings are now held remotely, especially hearings that are not, say, the trial, but maybe a motion to dismiss or some motion on evidence. It's a way to, we even have negotiations, we have settlement conferences. Those things have facilitated. Now, what's changed with that is that in the past, before the surge of this technology, you would have to physically go to these places. And so I would have to decide if I'm monitoring a case that's, say, not at the, you know, my regular level, but I'm assisting one of the other business units. Well, I'm not going to go. So for cases that are of lesser value, you're able to be there and participate because you can do it virtually, where before you would think, I'm not wasting my time going there on such a small matter. We have about 600 lawyers throughout the company, and a lot of them, I call them baby lawyers, and even then we don't send them. Now it's easier for them to participate. So that's part of the efficiencies that technology has allowed you to do in the practice of law. And other transformations are also incredible. So you can, for example, store documents, right? You can store them on a phone. You can store them on a thumb drive. Remember, we went from 2 floppy disk to my first hard drive computer having 10 megabytes of storage, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I am never going to need any more memory than that. That's all the memory I could ever need to my office. And now you're dealing in millions of terabytes, okay? So the other problem that occurs is, really, how do you go through that vast expanse of digital information? Remember, technology has its prices. So you're in a trial. You're a Fortune 500 company. You've got millions and millions of documents. How do you go through that? How do you sort it through? Well, what becomes important is that you have to have a system which now relies on artificial intelligence to look at those things, to bring them to you. You now have to have search terms. It's, for example, if you figure a company that has about $8 billion in sales, has documents and documents and documents, an option would be to have people in a room looking through them and reading every document, right? Or what you do is you use softwares like Relativity or Clearwell, and you just scan them all in, and you rely on search terms. And based on that, you look for the documents. But otherwise, you can never do it. Could you imagine how burdensome it would be to have dozens and dozens of people in some back room somewhere reading all those documents and coming up with conclusions? I know early on, before artificial intelligence came on, that's pretty much what you had. You had people just sitting there reviewing documents. They would contract with lawyers. Now you're able to scan that and specifically search the terms. So when you look at one of the great developments in technology is, well, the development of the PDF format, right? It allows you to take documents, it allows you to scan them, it allows you to store them, and allows you to search them. So out of, say, 1 million documents, you're able, through the use of this artificial intelligence, get only the relevant documents that you need. Even that takes some time, but imagine the time it takes to go through those documents individually. So that's another way in which, this digital transformation has revolutionized, the practice of law. And so, the decision you have to make, and you may find this strange, is how much of this stuff do you store? Some companies have warehouses and warehouses and warehouses of boxes. Oftentimes people think, well, it's just a digital file. How much space can it get? But companies charge by the amount of digital storage. Where when we first dealt with a megabyte, then there's a gigabyte, now we have the terabytes. Even the cost of storing terabytes can be super, super expensive. It's got to be kept somewhere, right? It has to be kept. And companies will charge based on the amount of storage that you have. You look at it in your everyday life. How many people are going now to cloud-based? I often joke and say, there's no cloud. It's just from my screen to somebody else's computer. But that's the term they use, right? Everything now is pretty much subscription-based, and everything pretty much is stored on the cloud in some form or another. Many companies have Office 365, where they store things remotely. Your computer crashes, you open it up, and the documents are still there. And they also charge you for the amount of storage. If you have an iPhone that says, look at how much memory you've got left, and by the way, for so much per month, you can do it. So, the storage and keeping that information there is also extremely, extremely important. Excuse me, but just as you have to do with with boxes, you also have to figure out, well, how much of this digital stuff do we keep? And that's, again, another cost of technology. Somebody has to sort through that stuff. And then, of course, with all this information, you get into, is somebody going to hack me? You've now got ransomware. You've got viruses. Some companies have up to 1 billion attempts at a hack. That's why you see many, many companies are dealing with disaster recovery exercises. What happens if somebody hacks? You have backup systems. So you have the main system, and then you do these exercises that, if this system goes down, can we go up? And with many technology companies now, if your systems are down, you're in breach of contract. Some companies have a clause in the contract, because I've read them, that says, well, if you're down for more than 4 hours, you're in a breach of contract. So that's constantly having to monitor, to manage this expansive information. And one of our divisions holds about 60% of the escrow information throughout the country. That's a lot. If we're down, it's a lot. So you have to basically find a way to basically sort through that and make sure that you have a governance system to make sure that it doesn't get corrupt, B, doesn't get hacked, and C, that employees themselves don't get careless and let things in that could cause a problem. I know that we are constantly doing phishing exercises, and you click, it's a fish. They say, oh, congratulations, thank you for staying alert. So the expanse of information is just incredible. Now, question is, how do you implement this stuff? I mean, many of you go into a company and you say, well, they've got all this stuff here. I've got my computer, I've got my iPhone, my iPad, but if you're starting an operation in a foreign country, if you're opening up a new business, how to successfully integrate technology is a key role. And I have certain rules, my personal rules on that is, first of all, you have to establish what is your need, okay? Are you transactional? Are you in litigation? Are you in sales? What is it that you have to have, okay? Second, you need to understand your workflow processes. And once you understand those, then you develop the technology that's going to address that. And then the next thing you need is the training of these individuals. You know, somebody has to learn how to use the technology, which means they have to be trained. So those are the steps that you go through when you're trying to decide, well, how do I integrate this technology? And I can tell you that based on my experience, much of the technology that companies acquire, people don't use to the fullest extent. I mean, if it's your core business, possibly, but just personally, okay? If you go to your Word computer, you go to Word on your computer, how many of you actually know how to use all the features? No, because that takes time and effort. So to successfully, and you have to spend time training and practicing, and most of us just get up on there and type, right? All the things you can do with email. Do you really know what you can do? So too often technology is underutilized, and it could be utilized, you know, even more. So integrating the technology is basically something that's very key. Now with that comes the responsibility of properly implementing it, which means properly having the licenses. One of the things I do is manage software audits, and too often, you know, I see sometimes certain divisions will go through and install software without even checking to see if all the licenses are there. And sometimes they think the licenses are there and they have a license key, but the key is dependent on the location. So if you're in Florida, for example, and you've got an employee in California, that could be a violation of the licenses. So in implementing the technology, you have to have basically the governance. You have to know the licenses before you start implementing it. And then you go to, well, what is the finished product, right? The finished product is generally going to be information. It's going to be documents. It's going to be, you know, a trial that you have to finish. What is the product? And that's basically also something you have to keep in mind. What is the end game? What is the end game to what you want to do with this technology? So in the practice of law, what's the end game? The end game is to deliver efficient administration of legal services, whether you're an outside counsel or whether you are a corporate counsel. It's all the same thing. As lawyers, you have the responsibility to provide those services to your business unit. How do you do it? Again, that's why it's important to integrate the technology. In my experience, some people really embrace it, and some people really just resist it. Believe it or not, there are some things I do resist. One of which is this app called WhatsApp that everybody's using. On matters I have in Latin America, a number of lawyers say, well, let's just have a WhatsApp group chat and we can communicate through that. Absolutely not. I don't want legal stuff to go through WhatsApp. I want it to go through secure email. You add people, you subtract people, you forget who's on there. And I don't want to have to look to my phone on WhatsApp to put something on my computer. So I don't permit that. So remember, not all technology is good, but everything has its time and place. I don't know how many of you remember the Newton by Apple. That was a big flop. And the reason the Newton was a big flop, and it was really sold in the legal community too. Wow, this is great. You can have this handwriting technology. You can send the fax via telephone on what you type. It's a scheduler and everything. And it was a big flop. Why was it such a flop? Well, because the technology did not match at the time the services that needed to be rendered. The handwriting recognition was very, very rudimentary. It barely worked. It took you more time to try to handwrite something than it is just to type it. So when you're looking at digital transformation, you have to look to, is the technology sufficient? The Newton wasn't. One of the reasons why Steve Jobs said that the technology for the Newton wasn't good, because he was a big believer in using your finger. The Newton used the hand, okay? And that's why sometimes this new stuff that comes out is not necessarily the best, because the technology has not caught up to the services you want to perform. So I'm always hesitant to use, say, new stuff that comes out, because there are a lot of bugs in it. So successfully integrating technology also means is, what are the bugs? Especially when you're talking about implementing massive systems throughout the company, even just Office 365, there are bugs. For example, in Microsoft Teams, you have instant chat, right? How long do you store those chats? What's the purpose of the chat? It's so that people can speak or communicate without sending an email and just go back and forth working in Teams, right? But guess what? In a court proceeding, if you save that as an official record, it's discoverable. So let's just say that somebody sends a chat and says, "Oh my God, this vendor, I can't believe we over deployed. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Let's go delete the software." That is discoverable. So people sometimes tend to trust this technology too much, because no matter what you put, I know with my company, anything I put in the system, somebody can find it. Even though I've deleted it, it's there somewhere. Okay. So that's, one of the issues with technology. That's why you sometimes look at, how am I going to use it, and am I going to use it wisely, right? So integration so you've got first deciding what technology you need, you got second, the integration, and then third, you've got the final end product. Now, what are the pros and cons to technologies? I'm sure every one of you here who've listened to this or is listening has had some problem with software, has had some virus, or has had a situation where the software doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Or sometimes you feel that, we've lost the personal effect. Well, let's start with the good. The good is that it's allowed you to work efficiently. It's allowed you to work in multiple jurisdictions, correct? It's allowed you to do, say, more work than you could physically do at any one time, because you're able to now work faster on a machine. Just as a side, my phone has more memory than the Voyager satellite. You imagine that technology from the 1970s and it's still working? So those are the efficiencies of the system, right? The con, honestly, is that we kind of lost the human element, the human connection. And for me, it's important in my world is, despite the fact that I use technology quite a bit, that I do embrace it. For an old guy, I'm pretty tech savvy on a lot of stuff, but I also have to really stress the human element of anything. The human element of anything is extremely important. And why is that? Because very basic, it's even basic sales 101 or human relations 101. People want to do business with people they like, and most people want to be liked. So although you have all this highfalutin technology, sometimes don't forget about the human aspect of it. Okay, that's one of the cons, is people forget about it. How often do people don't respond to a text quickly, but you call them, they'll never answer the phone? I make it a point that whenever I have anything new, I call the person and I say, "Hey, my name is such, so we're going to be working together. I mean, I'm mostly a buyer of services. I don't sell my services, but I mostly say, hey, this is how I prefer to be communicated with. Um, yeah, feel free to send me emails. I kind of lay out the parameters of how I want this relationship to go from a technology point of view. Okay. And then I will say to them, look, rather than uh, outlining, or send me documents, send me an Outlook invite when you have a court hearing. So it's on my calendar. So, I go through a process of how we can automate certain things and then things that I want the face-to-face contact with. So, to me, the biggest con is you lose the human element. The biggest pro is that you have efficiencies of work. I manage litigation in Mexico. I've managed litigation in Prague, in the Ukraine, in India, Romania. I speak Spanish, so there's no replacement for me actually attending the hearings. I would try at all possible never to attend a hearing in those areas in Zoom. They don't do it in Latin America yet, but even in the countries where I have Zoom hearings, I am still missing something, because what I'm missing is the element of sitting in the courtroom, watching everyone's demeanor, seeing how they perform. You can't really discern much from talking to an individual who's talking in a box and looking at you, and you don't know what he's doing underneath. You don't know what other camera he's looking at. I need to observe, and that's one of the cons to this digital transformation, to this technology. But I think if you take that into consideration, and you apply the new technology and you implement really good legal system, I think you can have an effective and successful way of rendering legal services, not just as outside counsel, but internally. Okay, internally you can basically streamline processes, don't eliminate the human element, um, but that's how technology has changed. I remember watching, I used to love to watch Perry Mason as a kid. That's one of the reasons I wanted to be a lawyer. And I remember Della Street would sit there and she'd take shorthand. So let me just give you a brief chronology of the technology. Well, first, no technology. You had a person that took shorthand. And as the lawyer sat there at the meeting, they would be taking notes, right? Then it was the grunding, reel to reel, and sometimes they use vinyl. And we went to uh, other dictating machines. Then we went to the MagCart, which was a IBM typewriter that had the cartridge in there. And we went to the computers with the 2 floppy disk. We went to the fax machine. We went to the internet. We went to the cloud. We went from gigabytes to terabytes. So just in the 40 years I've practiced law, it's almost like I'm in 2 different galaxies from when we started. And that's basically my view on technology and how it's transformed the legal services. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to Jose, I'm happy to entertain any questions at this point. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Outstanding, Rudy. What a great reveal and perspective on digital transformations. Really, the application of technology to law practices. So I'm gonna bring my screen back, my camera back, and I'm gonna ask you to hit that button to stop showing your screen so the audience can see us in a bigger screen. And while you do that, I'm monitoring all the questions coming in, so feel free. If you have submitted your questions, I can see them already, but you still have time to ask additional questions here. Again, I still see your thank you screen, Rudy, so if you could go in there and interface.
Okay, there
Yeah,
you go.
there you go. Perfect. Now they can see us big again. So the first, there are lots of different questions and a lot of different interesting segments here. And I'll start with this one, which is interesting, kind of a fundamental question. You discussed this during your presentation that that you talked about lawyers, legal practitioners understanding what they do as a process. And there was an interesting reaction of the audience when you said that, because some of the folks who work with legal departments and law practices, they made some commentary that they feel that often attorneys and legal practitioners have a hard time doing just what you described, because they don't see what they do as a process, but they see more as a special skill set, or there's a bit of a resistance of seeing what they do as a process. Curious if you could talk a little bit about that. Is that true or not? How do you break through that and you show the value of process to folks who may think that they are really quite special in what they do?
Well, I think the people who ask those questions are probably not attorneys, because, and I would say to them is bring the attorneys in to the process. Try to educate them more on the process is important. And so as inside counsel, my client is the CEO, the business unit manager, okay, and I need to be able to understand what they're doing. So if the attorney's not going to reach out to you, you reach out to him or her, and you say, these are the processes. This is technology we're using. How can you help us with this? Get them involved in the process, because too often attorneys think, well, I'm a lawyer, I'm providing services, and here's a product. And I got to tell you, Jose, when you get to other, I mean, if some people think lawyers in the US are arrogant, go to Mexico. Oh my God, it's like, wow. And I sometimes have to sit back and say, wait a minute, I'm the client, I'm paying for these services, and I'm not going to do that. But get them involved in the process.
Very, very well. And of course, there is value in that, in the establishing that process, and sometimes identifying efficiencies in the way that that you do, that you run the practice and different aspects of the practice. So what I hear from you here is that get the attorneys involved and engage in developing those processes, and maybe they'll see the value in that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Very well.
Because
Now, go ahead.
especially older attorneys, don't want to learn new things. Well, this is how I've been doing it forever, right? It's not just attorneys, other people. It was good for me. I remember, my mother, she's 87, and I say, Mom, turn on the air. And what did we do without air conditioning? Well, then we just sweat. So
Yeah. Well, and I think that, there was one commentary that was a little bit longer, and as I was reading through it, it talked about exactly about that if you're in a law practice with 10 different attorneys who are kind of doing the same thing, each one of them thinks that what they do is very unique and not necessarily conducive to a standardized process. And that's a kind of a difficult barrier sometimes to overcome, according to some of the audience members.
that was a very, very important comment, because I can't tell you the number of lawyers that say, um, hey, well, those business rules don't apply, and I'm a lawyer. They don't really apply. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a business. They need to look at the practice of law as a business rendering services. And so you have to say to yourself, do you mean to say that the rules of business have no place in your world as a lawyer? I had a client once who was a music promoter when I was in private practice, and I would say, Lenny, you need to no, you don't understand. It's my business it doesn't work that way in my business. Well, Lenny, I just can't believe that the rules of business developed over thousands of years do not apply to your specific area in the entertainment world.
Yeah, exactly. There is that bit of an art and science, spectrum there, that depending where you are, that folks will feel more like what they do is a bit of more of an art and not, not science that lends itself to some process. And I think we all understand that it's a mix and it depends on the context. But let me shift gears to a different type of question that has come up, and this is more on technology applications. And specifically, Rudy, any experiences that you have had with artificial intelligence being used in legal practices? There is quite a bit of hype about artificial intelligence in transactional processes in general, in review of contracts, and being able to reduce lots of man hours, especially from kind of paralegal type of work, by using AI to identify what really matters, or even in some cases to write, to write things. But I'm curious to separate the hype from the reality that you see on applications of artificial intelligence today. Is it helping in the practices, in the law practices that you see? Is there real useful applications of artificial intelligence that you're seeing?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, it goes to the vast expanse of information. You can either have 100 people in a room reading documents that they'll miss things, or you can put them in a searchable format and use keywords. Anymore, courts really allow you to use keywords. And these are the documents you find. Now, is it perfect? I think when people think of artificial intelligence, I don't think it really means that the computer is thinking for you. In other words, what you're doing is feeding information into the system that you want it to sort through, in some cases, millions of documents to come back to you with things that are relevant. So if you're in a case and you need to know everywhere they use the word hacking, for example, and you've got a million documents you're looking, then there's 10,000 documents that have the word hacking. Then you use that artificial intelligence to weed it out, okay? But it's not a substitute for the human brain because there's still analysis. And part of that analysis often is your gut feeling too, coupled with experience and what you've read.
Absolutely, and that's that combination, the human machine interface is very important. There was another presentation from Siemens specifically on contract management where they use artificial intelligence, and it's similar, equivalent to some legal applications where they're looking at these contracts with 10,000 pages, and they use artificial intelligence to identify in the different contracts maybe risk areas, and they developed this over time where it was actually some level of cognitive application because it was based on the feedback of actual attorneys building kind of that intelligence, and then the system would go through these contracts and look for certain risk areas and do some evaluation. So things are moving into an area where it's becoming a bit more cognitive and not just searches and so on and so forth. But it feels that it seems that what you're saying is that it's an evolving area that for the time being.
Well, but remember, part of the reason for those contract software companies is to also establish some form of compliance, okay? So for example, certain contract clauses will never be allowed. So if you try to put that in, it's going to say, no, you can't do it. But keep in mind, that's all information that needs to be fed into the system, okay? I can agree with you somewhat where you say it can be cognitive, but again, it's still just a search system, right? If these are problematic contracts or problematic clauses, then the system's going to find those because they've been triggered somewhere. You know,
Yeah,
you're not going to have hell like in 2001 reading it and say don't put it in. It's still system-based search on the facts you have, right?
yeah, yeah. Very well, very well. On that same vein of technology implementation and applications, what do you see? I mean, you have tremendous wealth of experience. You talked about the evolution from fax machines. You started with fax machines, Rudy, and then you went all the way to AI. That's quite a bit of ground to cover. Now, which is excellent because you're an expert with a broad perspective and also an open mind to how things continue to evolve. I often say that there are only two types of people who predict the future: those who don't know and those who don't know that they don't know. But let's play with it a little bit here. And as you think in the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see the legal professional shifting, and specifically with respect to technology? Do you see a shift happening in the next decade or so, where technology becomes a bigger part of what legal practice professionals, do, and how would that you think will affect the practice of law in the next 5 years or so, even?
Well, I remember as a young lawyer, some lawyers started just working from the house. You're going to see much more remote working. than you ever have before, especially since the pandemic and Zoom. I teach law at Washington University in St. Louis, and I learned how to use Zoom, 5 years before the pandemic. So you're going to see much more virtual practices. You're going to see much more people, working remotely. That's the biggest change I see. I think you're going to see more developments with artificial intelligence as they progress it. I mean, even if you look at, for example, voice recognition software, when Dragon first came out, you had to talk like this and dear Mr. Smith. Now you talk like you and I talk, and it just boom puts it on there. Okay, so I see technology developing at the speed of light. So it's going like this at the speed of light, but then what happens is its implementation is following behind. Well, what do we use it for? And how are we going to use it? And then the third aspect of it is, okay, now you got to teach people how to use this stuff, and how do you do it?
Excellent, Rudy. What great insights, perspectives on the practice of law, the role of technology and digital transformation, all of that. On behalf of our global audience, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom, your expertise with all of us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And I say anybody who's listening, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. Just, good luck and have fun with the rest of the conference. Unfortunately, I have to log on to
Outstanding.
another hearing to finish up the second part of my hearing in Bermuda. So,
Outstanding. International law at its best with the use of technology. Thank you, Rudy, again, and have a great rest of your day.
thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Rodolfo Rivera, Chief International Counsel with Fidelity National Financial, sharing his wisdom and expertise on digital transformations related to legal practices. We're going to be taking a break now, and we're going to be switching gears now to a different industry. We're going to be welcoming the global e-commerce enterprise architect and innovation strategist from Mars Corporation, Lee Bogner. You do not want to miss the session. Lee is going to cover the journey of digital transformation at Mars and the significant achievements and milestones that they have reached. So this is a true implementation, a true leader and practitioner of culture, business, and digital transformation. I'll see you back with Lee at the top of the hour.